Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Grey's Anatomy Season 3, Episode 10, Don't Stand So Close to Me. Episode in a nutshell is a brief summary of what happened in the episode. So it starts, as always, we'll start with our patients. So the unrelated patients to anybody in the hospital are a pair of conjoined twins who come in to electively be separated from each other. And in the process of the consultation, it is revealed that both of the twins like the same woman, and the woman likes both of them, but is very awkward about it because she does like both of them, and then they make her try to choose. In the end, she does choose, but after the surgery, the twin she chose doesn't even seem as interested as he once was, having to deal with being alone, and then their beds are brought closer together and they realize, that closeness may be missed. The second one is, of course, a continuation. Harold goes in for his heart surgery, which does end up being successful with Erica, and Yang also helps. And this also leads to a bit of a reconciliation between George and Burke to a certain extent, as Burke narrates the surgery for George as it's happening, because George couldn't keep himself away from it, even though he was ordered to stay away. And then the third patient is Molly Gray Thompson, who is Meredith's half-sister. And then her stepmother comes in, and she's on Addison's service having to do an emergency C-section on the baby. And then Addison does the surgery on the baby, who is at first not breathing, but ultimately is able to be saved. And Susan tries to get closer to Meredith, tries to let Meredith know that they could be her family too, but Meredith ultimately rejects this. And then we move on to more of the dramatic elements. So first is that Meredith defends Christina the entire day while the other interns are against Christina. At the end of the episode, she points out how Christina was there for Izzy when she cut the LVAD wire, how Christina had helped Alex with his boards back in the day, but George is the only one who doesn't want to forgive her, even though he has seemingly reconciled a bit with Burke and also a little bit with Callie. At least by the end of the episode, he is willing to speak with her and not be super aggressive about it. When Christina asks why Meredith can't let it go, Meredith then calls her her sister, her family, saying that she's all she's got. We also get some checkup on Ellis, who is going through the time in her life when Richard left her rather than his wife, which does lead to a sweet moment between Meredith and Ellis where she hugs her mom. And then there's the fallout of everybody else from Christina and Burke's surgery. So there's Derek, who questions, since he left a tremor, whether he's actually competent enough to complete the twin surgery, and has a bit of a crisis in confidence on his skills. Bailey had that previously, and she tells Derek about how when her name was erased from the board, it made her question whether she should be operating as a surgeon, and that lack of confidence when there are lives in their hands could lead to a tragic outcome for a patient, and that is the consequences of what Burke and Christina did. But because they didn't lose any patients, and technically, according to Richard, there was no malpractice, there is no further consequences for Burke and Christina. They are continuing as usual, except, of course, the lost trust from their companions. And Richard, basically, Burke doesn't want Derek to try to fix his tremor, because obviously the original surgery gave the tremor, though had he communicated openly, they may have been able to do something about the tremor sooner without this whole thing coming about. However, Richard then gives him a lecture on acting like an adult instead of a child. He does give a similar lecture to Bailey about how interns are like children she raised, and sometimes they grow up to be just like them. Um, but anyways, by the end of the episode, Burke does come to Derek to look at his shoulder, so he gets over that. Christina and Burke have been giving a mutual silent treatment to each other, and at the end of the episode, she steps into the elevator to join Burke and Derek at looking at his shoulder, showing some improvement there. And Izzy also has started to be forgiven as Bailey allows her on Mark's request to scrub into the surgery when she wasn't allowed to do that before. Richard at first tries to say Izzy's on probation, but then Bailey points out that Christina's also made a mistake and she's scrubbed in on a surgery, and so Izzy is allowed to join them. I think that covers all of the major points that happened in the episode. So now that we've had the episode summarized, we'll now rank the episode. We'll rank on our mostly objective ranking list, which is mostly objective as bias and judgment do still apply, and then the personal ranking list, which is based more on opinion and entertainment value. So our mostly objective ranking, we have our single episode supporting character introductions. And I just count them all as a kind of a group. It's the twins in the love triangle that the woman they both like and who likes them both. So that's Jake and Peter Weitzman, and then the girlfriend is just Elena. They didn't give her a last name. And that's worth 1 point. Then we have a multi-episode supporting character introduction, which is the newborn infant Laura Gray Thompson, who is technically Meredith's half-niece, worth 2 points. Then our multi-episode supporting character development, which is the return of Molly, who we have met in a previous episode, and she needs the emergency C-section to bring Laura into the world, and because it's an emergency C-section, Thatcher and Molly's husband Eric aren't able to be there as they were out of town at the time, and that's worth another 2 points. Then I did feel that this episode did have a couple of successful emotional impacts. At the early episode, Harold gives a speech to George about how angry he is, and then turns that to say, like, you're lashing out at everybody else. The person you should be lashing out at is me. You should be angry at me. I smoked, I drank, I don't exercise, I don't eat the right foods. I did all of the bad things, and now I have cancer, and you're having to deal with everything and be in charge of everything. And he's mad at himself, but mad at George too. And I thought it was a really sweet moment. Makes the dad a really likable character. There was also the Meredith and Christina scene where Christina asks Meredith why she keeps standing up for her, and Meredith calls her her sister, her family, all she's got, and they have a sweet moment. And then at the very end of the episode, there is a moment where Ellis is basically having an emotional time dealing with Richard going back to his wife, Adele. And even though Meredith says like all of this has happened a very long time ago, like it's not happening right now. Obviously, with Alzheimer's to Ellis, it feels like right now. And Meredith ends up, even though the mother and her don't really do that very often, she does end up hugging her mother, who manages to calm down, and they also share a little bit of a sweet moment. And all of these together combined, I think are worth the 3 points, which brings us all the way up to 8 points. And then we have multi-season main character growth. And frankly speaking, I feel like almost every character had some level of growth in this episode, just through coming out of their crises of confidence or coming to terms with the secret that Burke and Christina were keeping being revealed about his tremor and the surgery. And then with Burke and Christina dealing with the fact that he has this injury and that he needs to get it looked at by Derek again, and coming to terms with the fact that like it wasn't Derek's fault, everybody's different. And Burke kind of has that realization while he's talking George through the surgery. Christina accepting responsibility for keeping the secret. Izzy and Alex kind of coming to terms with the fact that they've also made mistakes and that they also need to grow, and then forgiving Christina at the end of the episode. George is really the only one who hasn't fully progressed, but he also seems a little bit less angry at the end of the episode, and he is willing to talk not to Christina, but to Callie, um, or at least have a civil interaction with Callie, which is an improvement to the beginning of the episode. Bailey, of course, talks about her experience with questioning her ability as a surgeon, and at first she's very strongly pushing for Burke and Christina to be punished because she feels like an injustice was done to her in making her doubt herself. But by the end, she does come to terms with that. And again, Derek's crisis of confidence with not sure he can do the twin surgery because he left a tremor in Burke. And Bailey is the one who kind of talks to him about her experience and helps him to move past that as well. So, like I said, everybody grew, and to give 4 points for everybody's growth individually would take us super high in the points. However, the maximum score we can reach is 10, and the 4 points, a single 4 points, takes us over 10. There weren't really any negatives objectively that I found in this particular episode, other than just George's continued poor behavior, but that was addressed in the last episode. I gave -points for it there, so I'm not taking points in this one. So ultimately, this does end up a 10 out of 10. So we have our season 3 ranking so far in our mostly objective ranking. As always, when more than one episode has the same score, it is just going to be ranked in the order the episodes aired in. So we have in first, Where the Boys Are, Don't Stand So Close to Me, Let the Angels Commit, I Am a Tree, Time Has Come Today, Oh, the Guilt, Staring at the Sun, From a Whisper to a Scream, What I Am, and then in last place so far is Sometimes a Fantasy. As for the personal ranking, I really enjoyed this episode. I liked all of the character growth going on, everybody coming to terms, everybody having kind of their own dealings. I like how we brought in patients that are directly connected to the staff and the characters to give those surgeries a little bit more meaning, and how the twin surgery was kind of used as a way for Bailey and Derek to move on from their crises of confidence. I but all of the growth, like everything I mentioned in the mostly objective ranking, I stand by. However, I couldn't give it a 10, and the reason I gave it a 9 instead is, one, did not like the love triangle concept at all. I'm not into love triangles. And to be honest, in that kind of situation, there is no way for you to not interact with somebody who is literally attached to the person that you're talking to or seeing. So it's kind of tricky as far as what constitutes like infidelity, what constitutes like where your emotions go. Like you're not fully in control of your emotions. You're having to deal with both of them all the time. At the same time, I just felt like it was a really tricky situation for a love triangle. And I don't like love triangles just in general. And then the other thing was, again, George continues to be very angry, very rude, and I don't like George as a character anyways. I haven't liked him from day one. So this doesn't really increase my opinion of him in any way, shape, or form. And while he does get a little bit better by the end of the episode, like even being so angry and so rude to people so openly that his own dad, who is going in for a potentially life-threatening surgery, has to be in the emotional state of believing his child is mad at him and mad at having to take care of him, and admitting that he's mad at himself. Like, I'm just like, you pushed your dad to that, and that is just terrible. Although it was a sweet moment when they like, and makes the dad all the more likable as a character, makes Harold a very likable character. It's still like the fact that you were so openly hostile in front of your family, in front of your coworkers, to the point where your dad had to give that speech. Not cool. And even by the end, he's still rude to Christina. He's still angry at everything. He does accept like Callie asking about his dad, does give her an answer that his dad is good before walking away. But that's such a minor improvement, whereas all the other characters have had some significant amount of growth or been able to come to terms or move on. He's the only one that's kind of still holding out on that. So, like I said, I'm not a fan of that aspect of it, which is why I put it down to a 9 instead of a 10. But a 9 is still a really strong score, and I do think that on my personal ranking list, so far in this season, Don't Stand So Close to Me is in first place. And then we have Where the Boys Are, From a Whisper to a Scream, Staring at the Sun, Let the Angels Commit, I Am a Tree, What I Am, Sometimes a Fantasy, Time Has Come Today, and then in last place for me is Oh, the Guilt. And that now brings us to the series ranking so far. And in season 1, we had a score on the mostly objective ranking of 77.78%, season 2 second at 76.67%, and so far season 3 has 58 out of a possible 230. Meanwhile, on the personal ranking side, season 2 came in first at 72.22%, season 1 in second at 66.67%, and season 3 so far has a score of 73 out of a possible 230. But with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Grey's Anatomy Season 3, Episode 10, Don't Stand So Close to Me. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.